Welcome to Lost in the Woods, a 15-day countdown to the worldwide release of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. In this series, I'm dissecting one game from the Zelda franchise every day with the goal of separating the core Zelda game elements from the fluff. I'll show you how Breath of the Wild is the culmination of 30 years worth of Nintendo defining, losing, rediscovering, and finally perfecting exactly what makes a Zelda game great. The third game in the Zelda franchise came 4 entire years after the back-to-back releases of the first two, and there was a lot of expectation from fans and Nintendo alike to make sure they did it right. And man, did they knock it out of the park! A Link to the Past is generally considered perfect. In the tough-to-please gamer crowd, you'll be hard-pressed to hear much criticism about this game, and rightly so. The level of polish applied to this game is nearly unprecedented. Not only did it return back to the Zelda game roots with its top-down overworld map and dungeons, but they balanced, polished, and perfected the original formula in a way that only Nintendo can. The original Zelda, when compared to the beautiful and detailed world of A Link to the Past, feels sparse and barren. There are just so many aspects that Nintendo nailed. The music, dungeons, the feel of the top-down combat, the detailed art that fully realizes the overworld, replete with characters and dialogue. But most importantly, there was embedded history, lore, and plot. With the need for so much dialogue and a focus on fleshing out the world, the Zelda team was given a dedicated story writer, Kensuke Tanabe. Together with Yoshiaki Koizumi, the two gave us everything from the sages, the Dark World, the Imprisoning War, and the Master Sword. Things that are so key to making a Zelda game feel like a Zelda game were not even introduced until 5 years after the original Zelda's release. A Link to the Past does well in nearly everything, and it quickly became the de facto Zelda game. This is what a Zelda game is supposed to be. Those first two games, mere practice runs. But a funny thing happened. In Nintendo's laser focus on perfecting the original Zelda game, their focus shifted from the core that made Zelda great in the first place. They studied the end result of The Legend of Zelda and expanded that until it was perfect, which means that the focus for development was on the outward appearance of Zelda, things like the items, the dungeons, and the overworld itself. The original discovery and adventure through non-linear exploration was set aside for a much more tangible discovery and adventure through Zelda-related items, dungeons, and overworld, which translated into the introduction of two main core diverting elements, the puzzle structure of the dungeons and the linear plotline. In fleshing out and polishing the item and dungeon elements, Nintendo decided that they would introduce new key items within each dungeon, and by extension, each dungeon would require the use of that item to complete it. This is a really cool concept, and is in fact very fun, but the result is that it shifts the focus of the dungeons from combat-oriented mazes with a reward at the end to something much more involved. The dungeons are now puzzles to be solved, each one developed as a unique beast of its own. Dungeons with a correct solution, something that exploration does not have. The linear plot in an inherently non-linear overworld gives us some pretty weird results as well. We'll cover this in more detail tomorrow in the Link's Awakening video, but essentially, the only way to keep the players on target was to limit what could be explored. The side effect of this design choice was to limit the exploration to small subsets of the map at a time, then to give players tons of trinkets and side quest material to find, such as heart containers and secret grottos, so that they would still love exploring the overworld map. A Link to the Past is truly an amazing game which managed to unite a divided audience, one that wanted combat and plot, and another that wanted exploration and discovery. It's only remotely focused on Miyamoto's childlike love of exploring the woods and discovering lakes, but because it's so polished, A Link to the Past became Zelda. Nintendo set a standard for themselves, and that standard includes a heavy focus on plot, lore, and puzzle solving. It's a standard so large that it would take another 25 years of wandering off the path before they recognize that plot is a supporting core rather than a primary core. From here on out, we'll see Nintendo become more confident in their newfound formula, and in the process truly forget what makes Zelda great in the first place. This marks the point where they first step into the Lost Woods, confident that they could still distinguish the forest from the trees. Sadly, this is not the case. Tomorrow is Link's Awakening, the first spin-off title that manages to overstep its bounds in a big way despite being released on the small Game Boy.